So with me now, Professor David Lyon from Queen's University in Kingston, Canada. Yep. And I believe you have come up with a concept about surveillance. You talk about liquid surveillance. What does that actually mean? What do you mean by that?
Okay, the sociologist Zygmunt Bauman talks a lot about the ways in which we live in digital, in liquid modernity, and the liquid is an idea that I wanted to take into surveillance studies, and by liquid surveillance I mean to point to the ways in which surveillance is no longer highly specific and in going down very discrete conduits.
So it's not just about secret services watching people.
Exactly. It's flowing everywhere. It flows within organizations. Personal data especially flows within and between organizations in unprecedented ways. And so there's less of an obvious relationship going on. It becomes very fluid and movable. So that's one aspect. The other is that, therefore, it becomes quite difficult to know where those personal data are flowing. If something that began in a commercial context, consumer surveillance, ends up going through data brokers and is being used for policing or government purposes, you don't know where it's gone.
So when I use my iPad, I accept terms and conditions for services.
Yep.
And I don't necessarily know what's going to happen to my data.
Exactly. And so therefore, it's also more difficult to know what to do about it.
And what should we do about it?
Because it's everywhere and it's flowing and always moving. And so I think there are a number of things that we can do, if you like. There's a lot of talk about how you can protect yourself in terms of finding encryption devices and being careful about your browsing and all those sorts of things. But that's to turn it into a very individual kind of approach. I think there are also ways of doing things together and encouraging activities that, for example, draw attention to those legal tools, legal instruments that have been used to try to protect personal data, but also to find ways of doing things together. And I see the growth of what I think of as digital citizens that are coming into being all the time. So we don't just have to think in old terms of expecting a government authority to, as it were, look after us. Those are important aspects, but I think that when we actually look and see what people are doing online and how they are engaging themselves, we can see new kinds of citizenship developing in which people are taking responsibility, not just for themselves, but for a new digital space that is emerging. And so it isn't just an old-fashioned kind of citizenship that has to do with nation states, but a citizenship that is making claims about life in cyberspace, that is actually trying to do things that make things better for others in this emerging new space that we still haven't really understood fully.
And obviously there are all sorts of very serious concerns about data protection, privacy, choices as well, and whether one is limiting one's choices by giving up information about the choices that one makes. Do you think it's realistic, though, what you're offering as a kind of a model? It's almost like a civil society regulation model. Is that a realistic way of protecting human rights online?
This is something that affects all of us in everyday life. It is something that's going on in so many different parts of the world. I mean,
so
at the moment there are like 10 billion plus devices connected to the internet, and that is increasing exponentially. So this is something that engages all of us all the time, and therefore it's something that, it seems to me, has to be approached on several different levels simultaneously. It's an educational matter, it's a matter of social justice, it's a matter of engaging with corporations, it's a matter of seeking adequate legal frameworks in order to have some kind of sense that there's a cultural agreement that we should be careful about certain limits and boundaries. So it's something that needs to happen in many ways simultaneously. All I'm saying is that I think we have somewhat neglected that aspect of, well, what is actually going on as digital citizens emerge, as people are actually making decisions, trying to protect certain spaces, trying to open up certain other spaces. And so I think we have to be cognizant of these things at numerous levels.
And at great speed as well.
And at great speed. But then we're getting used to that, as it were, speed of transaction and of interchange within these spaces. Of course, there are also just times when we need to learn to say no. Because there may well be certain aspects of these devices that are changing our lives in ways that are unhelpful, unconducive to a full life. I see these things in large terms, not just how we can protect these spaces or our liberties or whatever, but also how we can, through the internet, actually encourage and develop human flourishing. It seems to me that, and also we don't need to just think about surveillance in kind of negative terms.
So you don't want to see it in terms of us and them?
Exactly, exactly. There is an us and them aspect to it, and we need to be very careful about that, whether it's Google or the National Security Agency. But at the same time, there are things going on that I think we can speak to, and where people are actually making a difference, including some young people who are spending their time on the internet, and frequently people say, oh, they don't care about privacy or whatever, they just exhibit whatever. It's not true. They're actually very careful as well as to what they're actually doing online. And those kinds of things, I think, need to be developed and thought through so that we can see what is emerging in this new space. So I think we have to think of it in those big terms, what encourages human flourishing, but also what in particular needs to have special attention paid to it in this rapidly developing world.
And hopefully we will all know who we are.
Well, there are many questions about that too. I mean, but it does go beyond conventional nation-state kinds of activities. It's something that is developing across borders. But then that's true of many other aspects of life as well. We're well aware of the challenges to citizenship from an increasingly mobile world, where there are many more migrants, for example. It's not as if it's only in cyberspace or where the internet is being used that old borders are being transgressed. We need to find new ways of living online, which I don't believe is any different from living offline. These two things are together. We're talking about bodies, human beings actively participating together in relationships. It's just that we do it online. I mean, Ed Snowden himself, when I was talking with him in an interview a few months ago, he said, I live on the internet. And he means it. He, as an embodied person, he lives online. So I think we need to get rid of some of those old misconceptions about what it is to be on the internet and see it as part of our lives, and therefore part of our lives in which we need to be taking responsibility. And I'm using that we in a kind of universal way, because everyone, as I say, is engaged.
Professor Lyon, thank you very much for talking to us today.
Well, thank you.